Previously on Korea Strategia. What do you mean they can't get back? They're 50 kilos heavier? How is that even possible? You think Jeb snuck what on board? The Umbra 1 mission is in trouble, so how are they going to recover from this Mun-sized blunder? Well, let's find out. This is KNN Tonight. Shocking news from KAXA as the space agency confirms their first crewed mission to the Mun is stranded. Northern Polar researchers announce a new exciting discovery detected below the ice. And the search for a missing boat continues into its fourth day. This is KNN, I'm Jeffrey Kerbal. National Space Agency KAXA have announced their Umbra 1 mission to the Mun has run into trouble following its successful landing on the Mun's surface last week. The agency confirmed in a statement earlier today the craft would not have enough fuel to make its return trip, with 3 Kerbonauts now stranded in low Mun orbit. KAXA's administrator, Ted Kerman, is about to speak with the media, so let's go live to the KSC.
What attempts have been made to make contact?
We're working on it.
Does he have enough supplies to survive?
We'll be looking into that.
What does this say about the agency? Are you going to resign?
No.
Director Sanders!
On a lonely planet, slowly spinning its way to damnation,
Hey, it's Kyle here, and no, this isn't a collaboration with Matt Lown, I wish, but as a long-time viewer of his channel, I couldn't resist the Blunderbirds tribute. And hey Matt, if you ever end up seeing this, hit me up. I'm sure we could have a lot of fun doing some fancy new movie in KSP2 when Interstellar releases. Anyway, you've seen the preamble. Val is heading out to rescue her fellow Kerbonauts, and in order to do that, we're going to make use of the 600 science points Bob has managed to send back from the Mun. We're scaling up with heavier rocketry, advanced fuel systems, and large volume containment, while also increasing our system reliability with advanced electronics. With this nice new hardware, it's time to update our Umbra lifter to a Mark II variant. The old Pollux SRBs are getting swapped out for the much larger CA SRB4s, which are from the Cormorant Airnology Space Shuttle mod. Our Skipper engine, with its Thud support clusters, is making way for a mainsail engine. An additional fuel tank is added to the core stage, a separation system is installed for the SRBs, and it's also time to redesign our probe cores for the lifters so they're a bit more efficient. With the lifter upgraded, we also needed a space tug. As this is a rescue craft, we started with a docking port on the bottom so we can connect with Umbra 1 directly. Because of this, we'll be mounting our Thud engines on the sides to keep our thrust vector straight and the plumes away from anything we're tugging. We're also really stocking up on fuel for this one, as we know we're going to have to drag Umbra 1 home, so the more Delta V we have, the better. No need for landing gears or science equipment, this is a rescue mission through and through, and Umbra 1 has all of that equipment on board anyway, along with a treasure chest worth of science as well. It was at this point that I realised, even with rebuilding the upper stage, we only had just over 7,000 meters a second of delta V, and I decided, no, that's still not enough fuel for this one. So we scaled up the core stage again, swapping the 2.5 meter tanks out for the 3.75 meter ones we've just unlocked. That gave us an extra 300 meters a second, and we also have a number of reserve tanks on board that are shut off and reserved for deorbit burns on each stage. All up, we're just shy of 8,000 meters a second, and that means we're ready for launch, only 1.5 days after Umbra 1 left. As always, it's a nice sunny day at the KSC, and Umbra 1 is ready on the launch platform. Credit to the R&D team who, for our narrative, were already testing all these parts, and the hardware was just lying around. Yeah. So Val, we haven't tested this craft like at all, so no pressure and good luck. So here's the plan. We're going to get into orbit and circularize using as little fuel as possible. We're then going to land our core stage booster back on Kerbal, and we're going to use our interstage to boost the capsule almost to Mun Orbit and then backburn so it too can return for a Kerbal deorbit. And then our upper stage will handle that final 100 meters a second insertion burn for the Mun Orbit itself. We'll deal with the Mun Orbit operations when we get there. Now, the eagle-eyed among you might have noticed we did not power down for max Q this time around, and that's simply because of the way these particular SRBs work and our thrust to weight ratio. We started off with a TWR of about 1.5, which steadily climbed as we took off before peaking at 1.9 around 30 seconds into the burn. Then the thrust starts to slowly decrease, eventually dropping right back to a ratio of 1.1. Now this is because these particular boosters are designed to be used with a shuttle, as part of the previously mentioned Cormorant Aeronology Mark III shuttle mod. And this reduction in thrust is in line with how the real shuttle SRB's thrust changed over the course of the flight. Put simply, the shuttle SRBs are tuned to throttle down at max Q and then throttle back up again in line with the expected weight of the liquid fuel tank. Now, I know there are going to be a few people going, how on earth do you throttle down an SRB, as they just burn through their propellant until no fuel is left? Well, the boffins in charge of designing these rockets were pretty darn smart. Inside an SRB, the solid rocket fuel is shaped like a really tall donut, with a hole running the length of the booster down the middle. The inner surface of this hole is what's set alight to generate the thrust, burning outwards towards the booster's outer casing, while directing the heated gas to the engine nozzle at the bottom down that hole. So what if this hole had lots of little teeth around it, more like a jagged cog shape? Well, you'd have a lot more surface area to burn on those little triangles, and you'd generate more thrust. When those teeth burn off, the thrust drops down and you're left with an expanding surface area as the ring hole enlarges, but this doesn't change the thrust as much, as there's now a much larger area for the combusting gas to move in, actually resulting in less pressure and therefore less thrust, even with that larger surface area. This is how the SRBs on the Space Shuttle were able to throttle down for max Q, and it's exactly how these SRBs from the mod are designed to work as well, so that you get the same effect and same types of thrust as you'd see with the shuttles. Unfortunately for us, however, we're not flying a shuttle, so the thrust of the SRBs is eventually quite negligible due to our larger rocket weighing a lot more. But lesson learned, I might give some supporting SRBs to the SRBs next time. Kidding. I'm pretty sure I learned about the SRB details through the Outward Odyssey book series. They do a history of the space shuttles called Bold They Rise and Wheels Stop, though don't quote me on that, as it could have also been through one of the many space podcasts I've listened to over the years. They're great books either way, so I'll link them in the video description, but the audiobooks could do with a more charismatic narrator. Anyway, while we've been learning about the internal design of the SRBs, a lot has happened on screen. We've landed and recovered both our core stage and interstage parts of the rocket on Kerbal, our rescue capsule is on its way to the Mun, and we're about to begin our rendezvous maneuvers. To do this, we've chosen Umbra 1 as our target and lined up our periapsis, or the lowest part of our orbit, with a spot on Umbra 1's orbit. Our apoapsis, or highest point of our orbit, is much higher than any spot on Umbra 1's orbit. Because of this, the distance we're travelling each orbit is longer than the distance Umbra 1 has to travel, so it will take longer to do an orbit than our target, meaning each orbit will be further behind them until they lap us and it starts again. Probably the easiest way to visualize this is an athletics running track which loops round and round an oval. If you have one person running faster than the other, eventually they're going to catch up to the person they've overtaken to lap them, and that's what we're aiming for with these maneuvers. So we'll wait for our intersection markers to get closer, whether that's in a few orbits or a full lap, and then we can create a maneuver node at our periapsis and shrink our orbit to bring those intersection markers closer together. We also have to match the inclination that Umbra 1's on, and that can be done by creating maneuver nodes at either the ascending or descending markers, which are where our orbital paths cross over. Oh, and would you look at that, there's Umbra 1, and things are not necessarily looking good. Well, that's some good news. The boys are alive and kicking. Well, I mean, this isn't a horror game, so yeah, odds are they're pretty good and things are going to be alright. And these are the original team, after all. Also, for those wondering about the internal IVA shots inside the lander, that's a wonderful mod I recently discovered called Free IVA that lets you move around inside crafts, including using airlocks and hatches in between two attached vehicles. As always, anything mentioned, including news stories, books, and mods, will have their details in the video description. So now that we have access to Umbra 1's much more efficient vacuum engine, we've got a little pit stop to make on our way home. On screen, we're planning another rendezvous, and this one has had us running around on the inside track to catch up with something in a high orbit. If you remember in the previous career strategy video, Umbra 1 was not the only object we sent to the Mun. We used a booster stage to power our Mun entry, and it's been hanging out patiently here as a temporary relay. So we're making a fuel delivery so it too can also head back to Kerbal, and we can maximise the funds we can recover from this whole saga. Now that Umbra 1's interstage is all fueled up, we'll send it back to Kerbal first. So an escape burn, and once we enter Kerbal's sphere of influence, lowering the periapsis into the atmosphere to help shave off some of that speed with aero braking. And then it's the usual parachute-assisted re-entry for the craft with a nice explosive touchdown on the grasslands, thanks to 4x time warp overstressing the engine bells on landing despite only touching down at 7 meters a second. And that leaves us with bringing home our 4 Kerbonauts and their 2 crafts, and it's much the same story. A quick escape burn followed by a mid-course correction to lower our Kerbal periapsis, and then we'll circularize ourselves around Kerbal. Now, why do that last part? Well, I want to land as close to the KSC as possible, and even after lowering our orbit, we still have 600 meters a second left in the tank. So might as well use it up and give ourselves as controlled a re-entry profile as possible. We also grabbed some extra science on our way around the planet via some EVAs, and then began our final burn for 400 meters a second with an estimated heading off the east coast of the KSC. Unfortunately, the inbuilt trajectory guide with Kerbal Engineer only provides a good landing indicator if there's no atmosphere, which in its defense is the lion's share of planets and moons in KSP. What I should have done in retrospect is turned on trajectories to get a much more accurate idea of where we'll be landing, as unfortunately we end up about 5 to 10 kilometers short of the KSC. Don't worry though, I do get better at these landings as the series goes on, and it will justify the inclusion of landing legs on the boosters as we bring them back to the KSC. So while we floated down, we had only 18 meters a second left in the tank, and we were falling at a rate of 14 meters a second, so the plan was to fire it off the moment before touchdown and drop our velocity by 6 meters a second for a nice light touchdown. That didn't happen. While we have managed to arrive safely home, we have lost our engine, which is one of the most expensive parts and best parts to keep for refund purposes. However, that's a small price to pay to get all 4 of our lead Kerbonauts back on terra firma, and I think they'll all agree it was worth it as well. Alright, so let's recap the final stats. Before this flight we had 25 science points left, meaning we've earned ourselves a nice 427 points to spend. We're also sitting at 2.2 million credits, which is actually 180,000 more than before we left, in part due to completing the Mun program and returning from a landing. Both Bill and Bob have leveled up, and everyone has picked up some nice accolades from the Final Frontier mod pack for their efforts. I don't think I've mentioned it before, but as we have a variety of mods installed that don't fit in the standard tech tree, we're using a mod called Community Tech Tree, which allows these parts to be unlocked at appropriate levels in career and science playthroughs. So this is why my tech tree looks a little bit different from standard. With this newly gathered science, let's pick up high-powered electrics and unlock some of the earlier nodes we skipped, including aviation and storage technology. And with that done, it's time for a next episode preview. Jeb, Bill and Bob are removed from active flight status as the Umbra 1 investigation gets underway. A new class of Kerbonauts step up for their first big mission, with 5 new team members joining the ranks. With competition for flight seats at an all-time high and a 3rd group in training, will the originals get another chance to visit the Mun surface? Next time, the places you'll go. Is Val up to the task of leading these new recruits after her heroic last mission? Well, we finally got them home in the end, and that's where we're going to leave it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had as much fun as I did making this. Obviously, not all of the videos are going to have this level of graphics and storytelling to them, but for special occasions such as the first landing on planets and moons, I'm hoping to make them a little bit bigger. Next video, we'll be doing something a little silly in KSP2, or at least trying to, and after that, we'll be returning to the Artemis program to expand the Lunar Gateway. Full details over in the Community tab. So until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next pass.